What kind of quartermaster would I be if I didn't plan ahead for food shortages? That was Pat Glover. My name's Kevin, and this is History Goon. What's going on, everybody? I'm back again. We're back together. We are back together like a family. So this week, we're going back to my comfort zone of World War II, which I know is probably a counterintuitive thing to say of, World War II being your comfort zone. But when it comes to research and just finding crazy people, that's where I'm at. That's my happy spots. In this episode, yes, it's World War II and a lot of violence and all that. A little bit more lighthearted than what's to come in the next week after this episode, which I'm going to tell you guys right now. This episode will drop on Monday, like it always does. The following episode to this is going to drop on a Friday because it coincides with the anniversary of the event itself. And I felt like that would be a more appropriate and more, I felt like that would be a more appropriate time to drop that episode than just kind of randomly. Like, hey, here's this, when we could have it come out on the day where the event happened. And have kind of show a little bit of respect for the people involved with it because, spoiler alert, it's bad. It's not a good thing that happened. And oh boy, do I have some interview clips that are going to prove that. Anyway, Joseph Winston Glover was born, British time style, 16 October 1908 in Wigan, Lancashire. Even though none of those names, Joseph, Winston, or Glover, have anything remotely to do with the elongated form of Pat, which is Patrick, if you're not familiar. He went by Pat. I'm not sure why. It makes absolutely no sense to me. In his childhood, kind of a mystery. Couldn't find anything about his early life or schooling or anything like that. I mean, it was the early 1900s in England. They were kind of busy with a world war and stuff. So he was probably in and out of school, working in a factory somewhere. Hard to say. We don't really know. So we're going to jump directly into the action here. We're going to go from his birth in 1908 right up to 1939 when the Nazis invaded Poland. I did make a joke in here about they marched in backwards so that the people in Poland thought they were actually leaving. We know from last time the Poles are pretty cool, actually. If you haven't listened to the Winged Hussar episode, if you haven't listened to the Jan Sobieski episode, which is the one that came out directly before this, go back and listen to it. And know that, yes, I did just make a joke about the Poles being dumb. It was a joke. They are fantastic. So England wasn't super keen on the idea of Germany invading Poland. September 3rd, Neville Chamberlain, who was the British Prime Minister, committed to help the Poles and declare war on the evil Empire of Germany. The important thing to remember here is that this didn't just set the Brits on a course for war. It set all of their colonies, like we said with the Francis Peggy-Magabo episode. England goes to war, India, Australia, Nepal, Canada, New Zealand, everybody under the British flag goes to war. That's just how it works. Jumping ahead to 1942, where by this point, he has been in the 4th Hussar Cavalry Regiment for about 12 years. So he joined up before World War II actually kicked off. Most of his time had been served in peacetime, but he'd be given an emergency commission to Quartermaster in the Pioneer Corps on July 20th of that year. As the Quartermaster, it's his job to help gear up the battalion, but he's actually also part of the formation of the battalion itself. After they're all squared away, he and the newly formed 10th Para Regiment would be shipped off to Brit Egypt March 6, 1943. From here, they would be shipped to Ramat David, which was Palestine, now Israel. That's a whole can of worms that we're not going to get into because, believe it or not, the whole Israel-Palestine thing in 2025 still kind of a hot button issue. Has been for about 5,000 years. I don't know. They still don't like each other. If they're going to keep arguing, I say we give it back to the Romans, but that's just my opinion on that. And the reason they went here is because at this point in time, it was I can't remember the name of it. ADD break. So at this point in time, it was still technically British Mandatory Palestine was the name of it, because after World War I, when the Brits and the Kiwis and the Australians fought like dogs against the Turks, they ended up taking the Holy Land after the whole, the whole World War I thing had happened. But the British Empire had control over it. And it's got like the lamest flag you could ever see. It's just a red flag. It's a red flag with a white circle that says Palestine with a Union Jack in the corner. You'd think that these guys could get a little bit more creative. Oh, hold on. There's a blue one too. Who knows which one's what? Anyway, now Lieutenant Glover was there to oversee the transfer from Palestine to Tunisia, where they would link up with the rest of the 1st Airborne Division. So next up on his World War II bingo card was Operation Slapstick, which consisted of Brits landing in Taranto. They landed there by air and sea. Taranto is a city in Italy that's spelled differently than the city of Toronto in Canada. But it sounds like if you were from Minnesota and said Toronto, that's how it's supposed to come out, according to the Google translation thing that I just listened to. So it's Taranto. Anyway, last time I said anything about the Canadians, I got yelled at for it in a Spotify review. Even though I was just pointing out that they kind of had mass graves of natives, so we're not the only bad guys. The landing at Taranto was within weeks of the Italians surrendering to the Allies. And if you're not super familiar with how this whole thing worked in Italy during World War II, as soon as the Italians surrendered, they immediately flipped and declared war on Germany. They hit them with that Uno reverse, except they weren't good at fighting still. So they're just like, we're going to give these guys control to fight and tell us what to do instead of you guys. Like most plans that come by way of super short notice, it wasn't the best thought out option. The Italians told them to hit Taranto, which is in the heel of Italy, which isn't the best place to try and fight through to kind of get to where they wanted. They're going to have to fight across bridges and canals, and the surrounding land is flat and wide open. The Germans would have more than enough time and space to set up roadblocks and ambushes, and this is bad news for the good guys. The Paras would suffer 58 dead, 154 wounded. The Navy lost 48 men, and the HMS Abdiel was sunk in Taranto Harbor. So it was sunk September 10th, 1943. When it got into the harbor, there had been mines laid like just a few hours previously by a couple of German torpedo boats, S-54 and S-61, as they were leaving the harbor. So kind of bad timing, From here, he was sent back with the rest of the battalion to Rutland, where he developed a crippling heroin addiction and started hanging out in the Walmart parking lot with a sign asking for money. Oh, I read that wrong. I'm sorry. He went back to Rutland, England, not Rutland, Vermont. Now we can have a little bit of fun. We can goof for a little bit, He starts, now that he's back in England, he starts taking his boredom out on the local bird population. He's shooting sparrows, swallows, starlings, and the one you need to be careful about calling out in public, especially if you see a flock of them, the great tit. One bird that drew his ire more than once was the old Victorian weathercock on top of the All Saints Church across the road from his office. This was strictly in revenge for creaking and squeaking at night and keeping him awake. From a distance of about 60 yards, which is 6 first downs for our European friends. Sorry, it's 54.864 meters. I still hate the metric system. He put 2 to 3 22 long rifle rounds through it. At one point, he sent it spinning uncontrollably, which entertained him, so he kept using it as target practice. A few nights later at the mess hall, him and the boys did what younger men left to their own devices have a tendency to do. They drank a lot. And these are Englishmen. Drinking a lot, like high volume of alcohol for them, is different than it is for people over here. Because, yeah, they're drinking a lot, but it's also a higher alcohol by volume over there generally. Because like the average beer you get here at like a gas station or a bar, I think is like 5.5% alcohol by volume. And it seems like over there, a lot of them start at about 5.5%. Let's see, just for and kicks. Strongest beer in England. Holy hell. The strongest beer brewed in the UK is Scottish Bedfire at 75% alcohol by volume. There's another one called Brewmeister's Snake Venom, which is a mere 67.5% alcohol by volume, which you get up to that level, that 65 to 75%, you're hitting like hard liquor levels for a beer, which is impressive. So being drunk and arguing about the logistics of hitting this target at 60 yards, which, I mean, wide open with a 22 on a target that's not really moving 60 yards, even with iron sights, that's not hard to do. I am at best an average shooter. I could hit a target that size at 60 yards with open sights all day long with a 22. So this argument about shooting the metal chicken led into another argument between one of the gentlemen and Pat, where this other guy's saying chickens can't fly. They just kind of, Pat sets out to prove that he's right. Hungover or not, he's right. Chickens can fly. He ventured off into the countryside and found a small farm. He proceeded to spend the better part of an hour procuring a small brownish and red chicken. He inspected the bird and landed on the name Myrtle, naming her after a popular woman around the army base. Within a few days, they went up for parachute exercise, and Myrtle tagged along in a canvas shoulder bag. After he jumped to about 600 feet, so he's jumped out of an airplane, and he gets down to about 600 feet. So after jumping out of a perfectly good airplane and having his parachute successfully deploy, he gets down to about 600 feet, unzips the bag, and tries to encourage Myrtle out. She sticks her head out, clucks a bunch at him, retreats back into the bag. He got down to about 50 feet, and then he pulls her out of the bag and then released her. And to the shock of the others on the ground, she glided smoothly down and landed gracefully as a chicken can. Which, chickens are not the most graceful animals in the world. As a former, I wasn't a chicken farmer, because we didn't have enough chickens to be chicken farmers. We were chicken hobbyists, I think would be the word for that. They tend to sometimes not land well when they even jump off of stuff. They're pretty stupid. And like I tried to tell my wife at the time, chickens are food. They're not pets. Just my thoughts. Glover landed, and he was so worried for the safety of Myrtle, not only because he didn't want her to run off and have to go find another chicken, he'd become quite fond of her. Like, she was his buddy. So he is so concerned that when he ran over to her, he neglected to wrap his chute up, and the wind caught it and dragged him across the turf. By the time he came to rest, he has a dislocated thumb. Within a couple of days, Pat had made a pretty neat little perch for her in his office out of a round metal bar, which, again, as a former chicken hobbyist, Round stock is not good for your chicken's feet for perches. You have to use square stock because they get a better balancing point and they don't have to curve around to hold onto it and put extra stress on their feet. So square kind of opens their little tootsies up a little bit. They're happier like that. If you're buying chickens, 1x1 square for your purchase. It's perfect. And it's super cheap. Anyway, she would hang out on his desk, and on one occasion, his superior officer gave him a ration of shit about the hen and demanded an explanation. And he responded with our opening quote, "What kind of quartermaster would I be if I didn't plan ahead for food shortages?" So, yeah, no, it's fine. She's not a pet. She's not up and coming paratrooper. This is my food source, just in case. He's lying. He's not going to eat Myrtle, I promise. Through the rest of the summer, Myrtle accompanied Pat on 6 more jumps. He would release her from higher and higher heights each time. Eventually, he could get her to jump out from a staggering 300 feet. And every time she made it to the ground before him and waited patiently for him to get there, and she would peck at bugs. And before I forget, after her 6th jump, she was awarded with her jump wings, just like everyone else that has completed this training. And since she didn't have a lapel to pin it to, Glover found a bit of elastic banding and made her a little necklace, and, she earned her jump wings, so she got to keep them. Both sets. I'll see myself out now. Next stop for the newly minted paratroopers, including Myrtle, and now 35-year-old Lieutenant Pat Glover, would be beautiful, sunny Lincolnshire to RAF Spanhoe. Beautiful, probably sunny, I'm not sure. England strikes me as being pretty gray, usually. I don't know, just, it's an island. It seems like it rains a lot there. It's like Seattle. But they would spend the next few days being told that they're going and then that they're not going, back and forth, because the weather needs to clear up before they can take off. And from here, they're taking off to Holland. As they approached the city of Arnhem to take their spot in Operation Market Garden, they got pounded with flat cannons. The C-47 that he was in took a few rounds, and he described it as, quote, sounding like the outside of the plane was being beaten with sledgehammers. I can only imagine. I couldn't. As an adult who's never flown on an airplane, I couldn't imagine being stuck in a metal tube and having artillery essentially bounce off the side of it. That would freak me. I would have shit everybody's pants in that plane. Our boy Pat, on the other hand, would be the first man out of the plane. Not like scared first one out of the plane. He's the leader of his squad, so he's the first one out of the plane. That wasn't without a little bit of hesitation. He stood in the door and looked down and sees a burning city below him. Mortars are exploding, flak shots rising up to meet his craft. He was also really nervous about his parachute not opening because he remembered all the times that when they were being sent out to the airfield to take off and then being told we're not taking off, and then going back to his office and dropping his parachute on the floor and kicking it across the room, and then being told, hey, we're going back out to the airfield. We're not going back to his office and dropping it and kicking it across the floor pretty regularly. And he suddenly is starting to remember every single time that he's done that. And he's also remembering that he had asked for a new one because he wasn't sure if it would actually open properly after. So he suddenly remembers all the times that he kicked this thing across his office. And then he also remembers all the times he asked for a new one because he wasn't real sure if this one's actually going to open or not after he's kicked the crap out of it for weeks on end. And it's weird. Being the quartermaster, that's the guy you usually ask for new equipment. So I don't know who he would have had to ask. I don't know why he couldn't have just acquired a new one, but this is the Army after all. So, and according to a lot of people that I know that have been in the Army, it is the least efficient thing on the planet, I guess. So he's standing in the door looking out as the plane's approaching his landing zone. Then he steps out of a perfectly good airplane, just steps out. And the way these parachutes work is they're on a cable. So you hook up onto the wire inside and you step out. And once you come to the end of that cable, the cable breaks off of the parachute and your parachute deploys. Hopefully, your parachute deploys. And then you just kind of, float down in. When he landed, he made sure to roll onto his right-hand side because he doesn't want to squash Myrtle, because obviously she is a highly trained paratrooper. She deserves to see combat just like everybody else. He doesn't want to squish her, so he makes sure he rolls to the correct side. So as soon as he's back on his feet, he promptly hands Myrtle, bag and all, off to his Batman. Not that one. Joe Scott. A Batman is an officer's personal assistant, which seems like a very British thing. And I don't know that we very well could have had that. It just strikes me as being more very, very British for your officers to have a personal assistant. As they're running towards the yellow smoke that marks their muster point, he watches as the city of Ginkle Heath burned around him. He did, unfortunately, happen to look up and see a bunch of paratroopers going off course and landing directly in burning buildings. You're wearing a wool uniform. You have a silk parachute. You're falling. It's Holland. Like, the Nazis were thick as shit in here. And you have the misfortune of having the wind grab you and deposit you directly into a burning building that you're not going to get out of. What a god-awful way to die. As they moved across the zone, Glover and his men encountered a very badly wounded lieutenant of the 156th Battalion who'd been hit in the legs and chest with incendiary rounds and was on the ground in a great deal of pain, understandably. Glover administered morphine, and like I mentioned before in the War on Drugs episode, you leave the stirret in a shirt pocket so that when a medic comes back, they can feel around and go, okay, he's had two stirrets of morphine. Can't give him any more because I don't want to kill him. Because you can very, very easily overdose somebody on morphine. Other paratroopers come across this man who was known to be a very popular and a pretty good officer. They found smoke coming from his wounds, and he's pleading with them to shoot him. None of them shot him because they didn't have the heart to do so. One of them, on the other hand, did take the lieutenant's revolver out of his holster, cocked it, and left it in his hand. He was later found dead. Not sure. Nobody's sure, to be honest, whether he shot himself or if somebody took pity on him and finished him off. Either way, incendiary rounds, if you don't know what that means, incendiary rounds are ones that, they will basically set things on fire. The following day, as the Poles came in on their gliders, which were, I'm pretty confident that I mentioned these gliders in the Patty Main episode. So all the way back to episode number 1. I'm creating a metaverse. Which reminds me that at some point in time we have to actually set up the Leopold Main scale of where people fall that I've covered, whether they be crazy, super fun badass like Patty Main, or the physical embodiment of evil like Leopold of Belgium. There's a scale that I need to build. And I mean, I could probably wait because there's probably going to be more evil people than I cover than Leopold. He's definitely up there. He's like probably top 10. Anyway, so these gliders come in. Glover sends one of his sergeants off to in a Jeep to refill water containers for the battalion. This Jeep driver is never seen again. I'm fairly confident he didn't just run off. He was probably killed, caught, captured. Either way, they never saw him again. As dusk set in, the 10th tried to retreat across the railway line to Wolfheise. Glover noticed that this area is lousy with German machine guns. To try to keep their silhouettes to a minimum, he and his guys, and of course Myrtle, are crawling up the rail line, and then they would roll off to the other side. As Glover is laying down and starting to crawl up across this rail line to get into position to roll over onto the opposite side, one of his guys is spotted and the Germans open up fire. After the ambush ended, Glover gave the most British order ever. It is time for tea. Had a stressful situation. Brew it if you've got it. We're having tea. As Scott is brewing the tea, Glover asks him, "Where's Myrtle? Where is my actual second in command?" It then kind of occurred to him that she hadn't been seen since the beginning of the machine gun fire. Scott had set the bag down to start digging, like one of these little makeshift foxholes that they were trying to get into. These guys are essentially digging with their helmets, anything they can do to get down low enough to get out of the line of fire. So Glover drops his tea, heads back to where the bag's been left under the cover of darkness, and not wanting to give away his position with the light, he starts feeling around for the bag. He finds the bag. It's wet. It's full of holes. Unfortunately, Myrtle was still inside. Glover gathered a few of his men, including Batman Scott, and they buried Myrtle, bag and all, underneath a nearby hedgerow. When Scott asked if they should take her wings, the jump wings, not her actual wings, Glover simply shook his head. This battle-hardened poultry had earned her wings, and she got to take them with her in death. After covering her over, Scott offered a few words. Quote, "She was game to the last, sir. Very, very British." I like to think that they each snapped off like a super crisp salute and honored her before returning to the trench. And of course, in Pat's head, he's just got this moment.
You're gonna die for some chickens.
Someone is.
At 0300 on Wednesday, the 20th of September, Glover was at battalion headquarters with Lieutenant Colonel Smythe and Major Ashworth of HQ Company. In view of the fact that the battalion was surrounded by the enemy and had become so fragmented that it was no longer functional, Smythe said, quote, "Look, I think we've had it. I've lost my command and I don't know where we are. I think you'd better get in pairs and decide if you want to stick with me or go at your own." Glover and Ashworth kind of discussed it a little bit between themselves, and they were both determined to stay with their commander. Because, yeah, the battalion is decimated to the point that it's essentially useless, but it's still better to stick with as many people as you can than just going off in pairs and trying to get out. That's crazy talk. By dawn, the remnant of the 10th Battalion had been gathered under Smythe and harassed on two sides by the enemy. They began to make their way back towards the Oosterbeek perimeter. As they got closer to the 1st Airborne Division's lines, Smythe says to Glover, quote, "There are not many Germans between us and headquarters, and those that are, we're going to charge." The remnants of the 10th Battalion fixed bayonets and surged forward, successfully breaking through the perimeter. Bayonet charges are always cool. There is nothing that is a more statement than strapping a sword to your rifle and going, "I'm going to stab you instead of shoot you," and then running at people. Smythe reported to Major General Uquart at the Hartenstein Hotel that they had just 60 men left. When they reached the hotel, Glover sat down and propped himself up against a tree. He needed rest. And even though he was wearing 2 pairs of socks, his feet are blistered badly to the point that they're bleeding and like pussing, and he wanted to just chill for a second. So he's sitting there and he looks over to his left, and also propped against a tree are 2 dead glider pilots. He's too tired to really pay them any attention other than, a courteous glance and, "Hey, sorry," kind of thing. As he rested, he heard the rumble of an aircraft approaching and thought, quote, "Oh my God, what's next?" But it turned out that this was actually the RAF dropping supplies. So finally, good news. Once they've been dropped, Lieutenant Colonel Packey, oh, God, I hope he's white, because if not, I'm going to get in trouble for that one, because that's how his name is spelled. So Lieutenant Colonel Packey, the commander, once these have been dropped, Lieutenant Colonel Packey, the commander of the Royal Army Service Corps, God, the British, he asked Glover and 3 other men to retrieve any supply canisters which had landed anywhere nearby. He's about to leave when Major Ashworth returned and gave him orders from Lieutenant Colonel Smythe to proceed to the crossroads at the center of the eastern edge of the perimeter to kind of just take a look to see if there's any other British troops in the area. After a quick recon run, he returns back to the Hartenstein. He's told to go back with as many men as he could gather. He finds a half dozen men, which is 6 for our British listeners, and established himself in a house with Lieutenant Saunders of number 18 platoon. Glover was later moved further forward into a large building, which was at one point in time a restaurant, which is on the corner of the lane. Just down the lane from this restaurant is a knocked out self-propelled gun, and in view of Glover's former experience as a cavalryman, Major Peter War with 2 R's, which, by the way, great name for a general, of B Company, called across to him from a building behind his position on the opposite side of the road. It's like, hey, go take a look at that thing, see if it's running, and if it is, bring it back to us. When he reached the vehicle and he opens the back hatch to go in, he finds it smeared with Campbell's Chunky Troop Soup. He's also noticing that the breech block's missing, which means that the gun is basically a paperweight. And the only smell stronger in the vehicle than the blood was diesel, which, if you've never been around diesel, that's a pretty strong smell. For the next 10 minutes, he struggled and fought with this piece of until he finally got it running. He made the crucial mistake of letting it warm up before just taking off. Because this is before the era of glow plugs in diesels, where you have to just turn the key and let it sit there until your little glow plug lights goes off, and then you can just start it. So he let this thing warm up for a couple minutes, and once it starts smoking, it becomes a target for both sides. The Brits seeing an operational German vehicle, and the Germans seeing a vehicle that they know they abandoned, and now it's running, and they also know there's no Germans inside. The shelling was so intense that it knocked his false teeth out. So I left that detail out until now, because it wasn't important that Pat had false teeth until like this exact moment. His false teeth are knocked out by the impact of all of this artillery and gunfire hitting the vehicle. And guess where they fall? If you guessed, directly into a pile of blood and other people's insides, you were right. There is no amount of glasses of water full of blue stuff that you would normally use to clean your dentures, to get them clean enough after they've fallen into another human to make them okay to ever put back in your mouth. So, for all of his effort and heartache over this piece of junk vehicle, getting his teeth knocked into another person, he made it approximately 30 feet before it gave up the ghost completely. Dawn of the 21st rolls around, which is a Thursday. Glover grabs his rifle and he starts shooting German snipers. Because the area they're in, there's known to be a handful of them. He's pretty confident that he hit 3 or 4. So after hitting a few of these guys, he doesn't take the general rule of thumb with sniping, where if you hit somebody and you're not spotted, you're good. If you hit somebody and they see that this person's been hit, you kind of want to get away from where you are. So he shoots 3 or 4 guys and kind of sits right where he is, and they finally see him and they start firing at him. They fired an artillery round that directly hit his building. This resulted in Glover falling from the first floor into the room below, which, if I remember correctly from, again, a former episode, the Iranian hostage situation for Operation Nimrod, I believe they go ground floor, first floor, second floor. So what we would consider to be the third floor is actually the second floor, meaning the second floor is actually the first floor. You guys shouldn't be allowed to do things. It just doesn't make any sense. He is somehow not injured through this whole thing. One private received a shell splinter through the bridge of his nose, which, and the guy's like freaking out because obviously he has a giant splinter going through the bridge of his nose. And Glover's like, I got you, dog, and just grabs a pair of pliers and pulls it out. He then goes to the side door of the house and sees a lone German moving across the road, whom he doesn't even hesitate, just guns this guy down. An enemy tank then arrives on the scene and begins to fire into the building occupied by Major War. Again, great name for a general. And Lieutenant Colonel Smythe. He could hear the 2 officers debating whether they ought to hold their position or get out of there. And in the end, they decided that moving into a building that's not being shot by a tank is probably a good idea. They end up going to the building that Lieutenant Saunders is in. Um, and they get there because Glover's boys are firing like rifle rounds at this tank and also throwing smoke grenades to try to give them a little bit of a smoke screen so they can get from one building to another. The vacated building was occupied later on in the day by a group of Germans, and this cuts Glover off from the rest of his people, except for the guys he's in the building with, obviously. And the Germans start putting a lot of pressure, and they're throwing a bunch of hate at him with machine guns. This matter was resolved when the paratroopers charged across the road and drove them out. Because again, bayonet charges work. Not anymore, but because it's hard to, to put it into a more modern situation, it'd be kind of tricky to bayonet charge someone who would just like aloha snack bar and hit the button and blow themselves up. Not a great time to try a bayonet charge. So after they chase these dirty Nazis off, Glover turns his attention back to sniping. And as he's about to shoot a German that's moving across like an open field to the north of his position, he's hit in the right hand with a bullet and it severs 2 good-sized veins. He's obviously bleeding really badly from this. So badly, actually, that they tried to tourniquet his wrist and they couldn't get the tourniquet tight enough to get the bleeding to stop, which is scary. Because once you like crank down on a tourniquet to the point where you actually stop bleeding, I think I can remember if it's 3 or 4 hours that you have to get like proper medical attention before things start dying. So if you can't crank a tourniquet down tight enough to get it to stop bleeding, you need to go to the hospital now. Like you needed to have been on the way there when you got shot. Glover passes off command of the building to Sergeant Hughes and then takes off into the rain on his own to head back to the main dressing station at the Schnunord Hotel. Man, that ain't a word. This word is 3, 6, 9, 10 letters long, and 4 of those are O's. I wonder if this place is still around. ADD break. Well, do you even say that word? I think I might have nailed it. Anyway, this dressing station is only a few hundred yards away from where he was shot. As he's running from house to house, he's being continuously shot at by Germans, and he would pick up a further unfortunate wound to the right calf when a mortar exploded not too far from him. But the source that I used said that, quote, but he otherwise reached the MDS intact. So yeah, no big deal. You got shot, you're bleeding out, and then you got partially hit by a mortar. But other than that, you're okay. You're not dead yet. You're fine. Glover was helped into the back room, which had been converted into an operating theater. The room is literally covered in blood, and he was lifted onto a makeshift operating table formed out of a stretcher, which is laid across 2 tables. The doctor told him, like, hey man, morphine's in short supply. I do have a dose if you want it, if it gets too bad. And Glover went, nah, I'm good. And he waved them off and just like, hey, just keep going. As the doctor was examining his leg, he gave Glover kind of a grim smile and said, quote, keep quiet and he'll go away. I don't think Nazis work on the same frequency as Jurassic Park T-Rexes, where it's like, just don't move. He won't see us. He'll leave. We staked down a goat. He'll go after that instead. The German turned his back on the theater, but remained in the doorway. Pat's not real sure what happened after that because, spoiler alert, he passed out from blood loss. On Friday, the 22nd of September, he is now a prisoner of war. Glover and several other wounded men were put onto a horse cart and taken to the St. Elizabeth Hospital, where he's put into a bed on the top floor. He had the wherewithal, whether it be on the horse wagon ride or on his run to the hospital, somewhere between being shot and being in the hospital, he removed his rank badges because he thought that if he removed his rank, it would give him a better chance to escape if he just kind of looked like a lower ranked guy, 2 days later, he's transported in a very similar fashion to the hospital that was set up at Apeldoorn. So on their way to Apeldoorn, there's an air raid, which obviously makes the Germans have to get off the road and take cover. But because these guys are all wounded in the back of this thing, they're like, hell with them. And they just left them there. Obviously the air raid passes, and they get back on the road. And when they reach Apeldoorn, a Dutch priest visited the wounded each Sunday. And we're doing the Lord's Prayer. As he's doing it, he's sliding additional things in there, which kind of give like slightly vague directions for anyone who wanted to escape. Glover overheard the words, quote, "Our Father, who art in heaven, Captain Peter, hallowed be thy name underground. Give us this day Otterloo." It was not the most precise description or instructions that you could have been given, but he kind of put two and two together and gathered that, hey, I should head for Otterloo and try to find a guy named Captain Peter, who's probably, I don't know, in the Resistance, because he mentioned underground. Unless, of course, Captain Peter is a groundhog. More likely that he's in the Dutch Resistance than he's actually a groundhog. Even though I want to see a Dutch Resistance groundhog. Thanks, AI. On the 15th of October, Glover was about to escape when a fellow officer expressed some concern over the fate of the men that were going to be left behind. The Germans and British had kind of come to an agreement that Apeldoorn would be treated as a hospital, not a POW camp, on the one condition that no one attempted to escape. Glover said that he really didn't give a wet fart what happened because it was his duty to attempt to escape. He's not wrong. The officer that he's talking to is like, man, we can't do this. He's very persistent, and he eventually forced Glover to take another man with him. Pat works up a really interesting plan here, and it worked pretty perfectly. He had planned to kind of sneak out with the cooks. The cooks are not like German. These are other prisoners. So the cooks are marched from the cookhouse at 6 p.m. every night back to their cells, which are not too far away. And he sneaks him and this other guy in behind the cooks. And as everybody's being like locked up into their cells, they sneak off and they find shelter behind the cookhouse. Here they waited for it to get dark, and at 19:45, Glover ran across to the green and buried himself under an enormous Red Cross flag, which had been placed on the ground. That was there. It's obviously the Red Cross, white flag with the Red Cross is the international, like agreed upon, like this is a hospital flag. And they would do that so that any plane flying over is not going to bomb this place because it's not a POW camp, it's a hospital, which wouldn't have stopped some people from bombing it, but that's okay. So he hides under there for about 15 minutes waiting for this other guy to show up, and he never did. Glover waits another 15 minutes, and at this point in time, he starts figuring something's probably gone wrong, so he continues on without him. From here, he gets close to the edge of the compound, where he first has to cross a road to get to the wire. But the problem he runs into here is that the patrolling sentries are too close together on the road in their patrol routes for him to have any chance of getting across the road without being spotted. So he waits for a while, and he's trying to figure out what exactly he should do. And eventually, he literally gets a sign from above because an aircraft flies over. And the natural reaction of anyone would be to look up at the airplane as it passes overhead. And as soon as he notices these guys look up, he bolts across the road, never seen, which works out pretty well. Here he runs into another problem. As he approaches the fence, he realizes that the barbed wire of the fence has tin cans tied to it, which will kind of serve as like a super makeshift alarm that anybody is trying to climb over or climb under, and if they hit the cans, they're going to make noise. But Pat Glover ain't no dummy. He brought a pair of wire cutters with him. He also had the foresight to bring some string with him to tie the wires together so that they wouldn't rattle or make noise as he's cutting through them. Once he gets through the wire, he swims across a dike and then gets up to dry ground. He's got his escape map, he's got a compass, and he proceeds in a southwesterly direction towards Otterloo. Again, this guy's not stupid. He's moving with caution. He takes an entire day to find his way around Dealin Aerodrome. He spent most of his time in the woods, and when it would start to rain, he developed the habit of using a towel to tie himself to the trunk of a tree so he didn't have to sleep on the wet ground. So he would go up above, he'd go up basically above where the eye would naturally fall. So he's probably, 10, 20 feet in the air. And he would tie himself off to the tree with a towel. At one point, he does this and he finds himself scared almost to death by a bunch of noise below him. And he wakes up with a start like, oh, the Germans found me. He looks down and it's a bunch of wild pigs that are just scrounging around for food. After 3 or 4 days on the run, he's tired, he's cold, and he's in dire need of food. He happens across the farmhouse and decides he's going to risk it all here. And he asks the owner for something to eat. The man answers the door, told Glover, go away. We don't want none of your kind around here. Oh, Glover starts to leave. Homeowner has a change of heart and told him to hide in the garden. He makes his way around the back of the house, kind of hunkers down a little bit, and the guy brings him out a shovel, like, dig a hole, get some cover. A member of the Dutch resistance visited 3 days later and briefly interviewed Glover before leaving him. A different man came on the following day. This time he's armed with a revolver, and he asked who Glover was and demanded to know the password that the division had used for the first 2 days of Operation Market Garden. That was a while ago. That was previous to being shot and blown up and having to escape Metal Gear Solid style. Glover thought for a moment and gave him the correct responses, after which the man presented him with a cigarette and also a letter from Brigadier Hackett, congratulating him on his escape and ordering him to do all that the Dutch instructed him to do. It soon became apparent that the man with whom Glover was speaking was none other than the mysterious Captain Peter. So not long after this whole ordeal, Glover is given a pair of overalls to put on and told that he's being evacuated to Allied lines immediately. He had been found just in time to participate in Operation Pegasus, which is the successful evacuation of 139 mostly British airborne troops back across the Rhine. Operation Pegasus is not to be confused with Pegasus Bridge, which is a whole different kettle of fish, and that's something I definitely want to talk about at some point in time. Simply for the fact that when I was tabletop gaming, playing a game called Bolt Action, which is 28 millimeter little guys for World War II, I went to a big thing up in Maine where they had, I don't know, there was probably 400 people up there for this giant tournament. And one guy built Pegasus Bridge as part of his table that he brought up with him. Nobody is more motivated to do cool shit than nerds. Because I will tell you, the detail that this guy put into a 6x8 table to play games on is incredible. But that was nothing compared to the guy that hand built from aerial photos and photos that were taken during it. He recreated the Battle of Stalingrad in 28 millimeter for people to play on this table. And I'm talking where the buildings are blown out at the bottom. You see these little chunks of, they look like little tiny bricks. And that's because this guy spent a bunch of time in his garage breaking up bricks with a hammer to get them small enough to look like they would go into a 28 millimeter building. Absolutely incredible. The detail that people will put into the terrain for these kind of things. I built a house once out of, balsa wood and popsicle sticks and actually made it look pretty decent. But that's nothing compared to this. This guy spent probably years doing this. He had to rent a U-Haul truck, right? To put this table in and then unload it there to let strangers put their grubby ass little hands on it and make their little plastic men move across the table and try not to die, and then load it back onto a U-Haul truck and bring it home. Incredible. So Captain Peter and Pat leave the farmhouse on a bicycle with Captain Peter pedaling and Glover sitting on the back. They're soon confronted by a German soldier on a motorcycle. Glover gets a little worried because he's thinking that maybe this guy gave him away. But it becomes pretty obvious pretty soon that the German is just lost and he's trying to find directions on how to get back. And here's where, if you're from a tourist area, you give him the the pro tip of like, oh, this is where you're going. I'm going to tell you how to get there. And you tell them the way that takes way more time to get there than how long it should be. Oh, you're trying to get to the ski resort that's 15 minutes from here? I'm going to give you the route that takes an hour and a half. You're welcome. And they continued on their way until they saw a column of some 200 or 300 German infantry marching in their direction. The Dutchman asked if Glover had any weapons in hand. And all he had was his wire cutters, so they decided to just basically run the gauntlet and hope that they don't get caught. The closest call that they have in this entire thing is at one point, Glover looks down and notices that his overall leg is kind of pushed up, and is pushed up far enough that you can see the British Army green trousers underneath. Thankfully, not a single German noticed this, and they passed completely unmolested. After traveling quite a ways, they arrive in the woods where the participants of Operation Pegasus were gathering for the journey to the riverbank. Glover was put in command of a small group of Americans, and it was for their successful evacuation that he would later be awarded the U.S. Bronze Star, which is pretty good. That's pretty cool. It's something that happened quite a bit during World War II and World War I, where if you were working together with an allied country and you do something wild like this, that they would also give you their medal to go with it. There is, I don't know, a billion dudes from England and the U.S. that got Croix de Guerres during World War I and World War II, which are the French Medal of Honor, because obviously the French military didn't need them. So back to the story here. He was on the last boat to cross the river, but it had to turn back because they were so excited to get on their way that they left behind the engineer that had guided them in. So they have to go back and get this guy that's like, I risked my life to come over here to help you, and you're like, just taking off? Oh. Here's his citation. Quartermaster Lieutenant Glover, quartermaster of the 10th Parachute Battalion, took command of a company when all the other officers became casualties during the confusion and bitter fighting west of Arnhem. Throughout 2 days of fighting, he led his men with great gallantry and complete disregard to his own safety. He was wounded and taken to a German dressing station where he displayed great initiative in assisting the chief British doctor as hospital quartermaster. Later, he escaped and joined up with a body of about 100 other airborne troops behind the German lines. Here again, he was tireless in his assistance in organizing this party. During the subsequent planning and execution of a brilliant mass escape through the German lines, Lieutenant Glover again showed the greatest courage and leadership. His continued bravery and devotion to duty were outstanding. Once across the Rhine, Glover was taken to a hospital in Nijmegen and was then flown back to England by the end of October. Glover returned home to discover that his wife had on the 24th of September given birth to their third child, John Winston. Now, that's the end of his story in combat. When the All Saints Church was under renovation in 1989, the weathercock was replaced. On October 20th, 1991, the cock was presented as the battalion shooting trophy by retired Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Winston Patrick Pat Glover to the 10th Para. The Summerby weathercock lived in the sergeant's mess at the battalion's location in White City until 10th Para was disbanded in 1999. Pat Glover died in 1996 at the age of 88 years old, and Myrtle was probably like 2 or 3 when she was brutally gunned down by German machine gunners. Anyway, that was Pat Glover and Myrtle, the Para-Chicken, who deserves all of our respect and love. Godspeed, Myrtle. So, for all you folks on Patreon, and I think I did it on Facebook as well, I made mention that October is an incredibly busy month for me. That being said, I've been working very, very hard. I have 2 episodes, one for sure that's going to drop in October, because it's going to be the first week of October. Comes out on the 3rd. And if I did my calendar right, I should have the other one out at the end of the month. These are big episodes. I'm not sure that I want to say what they are. One of them comes out on October 3rd. The other one is going to be episode 28, which is because this is the 28th anniversary of the event. But the ones in the middle might be a little shorter because October's super busy for me. I work at the local fire department here in the town that I'm in. We've been doing a volunteer. The volunteer fire department has been running a haunted house for this will be the 42nd year that it's been running. I have been there this will be my 31st year of it as a volunteer. All of the money that we make there goes directly back to the fire department for new and upgrading, equipment, things like that. We work our balls off for this place. One of my friends that is, so how this whole thing works is it's a guided tour through, right? Last year was the first time since I was 17 years old that I was actually in a scene. Last year was like, I'm going to do a room because we had a room that came up that nobody wanted to do anything with. So I was like, I'm going to go zero effort, right? And that turned out to be one of the rooms that the people liked the most because I wasn't in there trying to scare you. I basically just set up a table and I put a skeleton at it and I put a crystal ball at it and I put a speaker under the skeleton. And I have a security camera that I put up. Security camera meaning is my old webcam that I put up on top of my little box that I built that I would sit in with my laptop. And just bust people's balls. Just give them terrible, terrible fortunes. So I'm going to do that again this year. And that's I believe it's the second and third weekends of October. So we're busy. Like one of my friends that runs the room directly after mine, very, very good friend. I've known this man since I was 15 years old. He's been up there since June, almost every weekend working on his room. That's the kind of dedication that we put into this. So if you're in Vermont or if you're in the area of New York, that would be fairly close. Or if you're in New Hampshire, hell, we have people that come up here from Massachusetts and Connecticut just to go through it. If you guys go through this thing, if you want to go through this, if you're going to go through it, shoot me a message beforehand because I would love to just pop out and say hi if you're going to be there. It's the only thing, the only thing that kind of keeps me sane in the month of October, because October was a big month. And a lot of it revolves around that place. So it's hard, but it's a place that's near and dear to my heart. And I would encourage anybody within the area, if you want to come up and just have some fun, donate to a good cause. The Pittsford Haunted House is probably the best thing you can do in the area. I'll try to throw some links in, but I don't know why I went off on that tangent. Probably because it's 12:30 and I'm exhausted. But yeah, so basically, long story short, I made way more work for myself this October than I normally would by deciding to put out a big episode. When I say big episode, I'm talking like I would say 55 to 60 hours of research between reading and watching documentaries and interviews and stuff like that. So it's a big one. It's a very big episode. And it's something that I hope when it comes out, how do I want to put this? I think when this episode comes out, this could be big for the show. So that being said, share this thing with people, everybody. Share it with people you work with, people you like, people that you don't like. I don't care. Spread the word. Let them know about the History Goon podcast and the YouTube channel. I don't forget about you guys because you guys are cool too. And if you want to hear it early, head over to Patreon, patreon.com/1159media. $5 a month gets you early access to my show. It gets you early access to the Never Daily. It gets you early access to 911 calls with the operator. I know that Luther is on his own Patreon now. He's still with 1159. I'm super happy about that. Also super happy for him doing his own Patreon, where he's going to start making his own money. He's going to kill it on Patreon. But Yeah, so $5 a month gets you early access to all that. If you think that what I'm doing on my own is good and you want to offer me you want to throw me a couple bucks, again, I'm not going to digitally panhandle, but now that I said that, I do have a Ko-Fi. It's ko-fi.com/historygoonpod. You can donate anywhere from I think it's like $2, $5, something like that is like the lowest. Anywhere up from however much you want to give me. If you give me more than $100, I'm going to email you and be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You have to have something better to spend $100 on. But yeah, if you want to throw me a couple bucks, that's a way to do it. You can also go over to Facebook. We have a Facebook page for the entire group. A lot of cool people, just us in there goofing, having fun, doing history memes. It's mostly history memes. So if you're into that, you'll be in good company. And with that, we're going to call it a night, thankfully. We're all going to die someday. So go out and do some goon shit and leave a mark on the world, just like Pat Glover and Myrtle. Thanks.